She stood at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of untouched champagne in her hand, and watched her husband dance with another woman. The candlelight caught the gold threading of his coat, the same coat she had once brushed her fingers against in the quiet of their home, hopping for a glance that never came. Now his hand rested lightly on Lady Marguerite de Veru's waist. They turned, and his dark head bent toward her as she laughed, that soft, intimate laugh that made every head in the room lean closer. No one looked at the Duchess of Meridian. She was a ghost at her own humiliation, invisible in a gown of silver silk that she had chosen because he had once remarked absently that the color suited her. He had not looked at her once that evening. The music swirled. Isidora pressed her palm against the cool stem of the glass until her fingers ached. 2 years of marriage, and she had learned to stand very still while the world whispered. Tonight the whispers were louder. They said the Duke of Meridian had finally returned to society, not for his wife, but for the woman who had once refused him. They said the Duchess was a placeholder, a duty bride from the north, and that the Duke's heart had always belonged to the dazzling Marguerite. Isidora heard every word because she had stopped pretending not to listen. She had stopped pretending many things. She had come to London that spring with a foolish, flickering hope. The winter had been long at Meridian Hall, and she had spent it alone, writing letters he rarely answered, tending the estate, learning the names of every tenant's child. When his summons came, requesting her presence for the season, she had allowed herself to believe that something had shifted. She had packed her trunks with care, had imagined walking into a drawing room and seeing his eyes soften. Instead, she had walked into this ballroom and found Lady Marguerite already at his side, her hand resting on his sleeve as if it belonged there. The dance ended. Her husband escorted Marguerite back to her circle of admirers, and Isidora saw the way the older ladies tapped their fans, the satisfied gleam in Marguerite's green eyes. Then Alaric Thornwood, the Duke of Meridian, turned and walked directly past his wife without breaking stride. He paused only long enough to murmur, "You should not have worn silver. It draws too much notice," before continuing toward the card room. Notice. He had noticed nothing at all. Isidora set the champagne glass on a passing tray and walked, without hurry, toward the terrace doors. She did not stumble. She did not weep. She had wept enough in the first year of her marriage to know that tears changed nothing. Outside, the cool night air smelled of damp earth and early roses. She stood alone in the dark, listening to the distant strings of a waltz, and she allowed herself one moment to remember the girl she had been before she became a duchess. That girl had believed in love. She had believed that a promise made at her father's deathbed could grow into something tender. She had brought hope into this marriage as if it were a candle she could shield from the wind. But hope had burned out long ago, and all that remained was the cold, dignified shell of a woman who had stopped waiting. The next morning, Isidora sat in the sunlit morning room of their London house, writing a letter. She wrote to the steward at Meridian Hall, instructing him to prepare the dower house for her immediate occupation. She wrote to the village schoolmistress, asking if she might assist with the reading lessons when she returned. She wrote to no one else. She did not write to her husband, because she had finally understood that he would not read it. When the ink dried, she sealed each letter with calm hands and rang for a maid to have them posted. Then she stood, looked around the elegant, loveless room, and began to pack. Alaric did not notice her departure preparations until 3 days later. He had been occupied with endless meetings in Whitehall, dinners at his club, and the delicate business of managing Lady Marguerite's sudden and persistent presence. She was the widow of a baronet now, and her finances were tangled. She had asked for his advice, his escort, his ear, and he had given them out of a sense of old loyalty to a family that had once been kind to his mother. He felt nothing more. But he was not a man who examined his own feelings closely, and he had long ago learned to bury any that caused discomfort. So he did not notice that his wife no longer asked him about his day. He did not notice that she had stopped leaving a candle burning in the window for his late returns. He only noticed when he came home one afternoon and found her trunks in the hall. He stood in the marble entryway, still in his riding coat, and stared at the 3 leather trunks strapped and waiting. The butler informed him that Her Grace was leaving for Meridian Hall that very afternoon. A flicker of something, annoyance, confusion, crossed his face. He found Isidora in the library, standing before the shelves, her hand resting on the spine of a book of poetry he had not known she read. She was dressed in traveling blue, her hair simply pinned, and she looked up when he entered with an expression he could not name. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was quiet, steady, and entirely new. "You are leaving," he said. It was not a question. "I am," she said. "I have duties at the estate that require my attention." "Your duties are here," he said, and the words came out harder than he intended. "The season is not over." Isidora looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, very gently, "You have not needed me here, Alaric. You have not needed me at all." He opened his mouth to deny it, but the words would not form, because they both knew it was true. He had needed her silence, her patience, her quiet presence that never made demands. He had needed her to be invisible, and she had been. Until now, when she stood before him in traveling blue, already gone. "I have made arrangements for the dower house at Meridian," she continued. "I will not trouble your London household further. You may entertain as you wish. I will cause no scandal." She said scandal as if it were a distant, unimportant thing. Then she walked past him and he caught the faint scent of lavender and something inside his chest constricted without warning. He did not stop her. He let her go. Isidora traveled north alone, and with every mile the tight, aching knot in her chest loosened just a little. She watched the green hills roll past the carriage window and thought about the woman she would become. She would be a good duchess to the people of Meridian. She would make the dower house into a sanctuary. She would stop knocking on doors that would never open. She would fill her life with purpose so full that there was no room left for longing. She arrived at Meridian Hall in a soft rain, the gray stone of the ancient house rising against a pewter sky. The dower house sat at the edge of the formal gardens, a graceful building of warm brick and ivy. It had been empty for decades, but Isidora saw its potential immediately. She threw open the windows, ordered fresh paint and new linens, and within a fortnight she had transformed it into a bright, welcoming home. She planted lavender and rosemary in the neglected garden. She invited the vicar's wife for tea. She began visiting the tenant cottages with baskets of food and medicine, learning their names, their troubles, their small joys. She did not write to Alaric, and he did not write to her. Summer came, and the estate bloomed under her quiet care. Isidora discovered that she had a gift for organization and a genuine love for the land. The steward, a craggy old man named Henshaw, had initially bristled at the interference of a young duchess, but within weeks he was seeking her counsel on everything from crop rotation to drainage ditches. The tenants began to call her the good Duchess, and they brought her their problems without fear. She sat in smoky cottages and held the hands of feverish children. She arranged for a new roof on the widower's barn. She started a small lace-making cooperative for the village women, using a pattern she had learned as a girl, and the delicate Meridian lace soon caught the eye of a London modiste who offered an astonishing price. The women were overjoyed. Isidora felt a quiet, glowing satisfaction that was entirely her own. It was during those golden summer weeks that she met Lord William Ashford. He was a widower with a young daughter, a scholar of agriculture, and he had recently purchased the neighboring estate of Briarwood. He called at the dower house one morning to introduce himself, and found Isidora kneeling in the garden dirt with her sleeves rolled up, coaxing a stubborn rose bush. She looked up startled, a smudge of soil on her cheek, and he laughed, a warm, unguarded sound. "I had heard the Duchess of Meridian was a beauty," he said. "They did not mention she was a gardener as well." Isidora rose, wiping her hands on her apron, and felt an unexpected flutter of pleasure at the simple, honest admiration in his eyes. Lord Ashford was not a man of grand gestures. He was kind, thoughtful, and he spoke to her as if her opinions mattered. He asked about the drainage project on the lower fields, and she found herself walking the land with him, discussing soil composition and water flow until the sun began to sink. It was the first time in 2 years that a gentleman had looked at her and truly seen her. They became friends. Lord Ashford brought his little daughter Charlotte to visit, and Isidora taught her to make daisy chains in the garden. The child's laughter rang through the dower house like a bell. William, for he insisted she call him William, began to linger after his visits, sharing books, discussing politics, offering his advice on the estate. The village noticed. The servants noticed. And eventually the gossip reached London. It reached London on a damp autumn afternoon, carried by a letter from a bored society cousin to Lady Marguerite de Verrue. The letter spoke of the Duchess of Meridian, living apart from her husband, and of the frequent, friendly visits of a certain handsome widower neighbor. Marguerite read it with a slow, calculating smile. She had been waiting for an opportunity, and now it had arrived. She had returned from the continent determined to reclaim Alaric Thornwood, the man who had once loved her with a boyish, desperate passion. She had rejected him then, choosing a richer match, but that match had left her widowed and financially precarious. Alaric, now a duke, was the prize she should have taken all along. The wife was an obstacle, but a wife who was losing her reputation was an obstacle that could be removed. Marguerite put the letter aside and began to compose an invitation. It was time to visit Meridian Hall. Alaric had spent the summer in a state of restless irritation he could not explain. London felt hollow. His club bored him. Even the political debates that once fired his blood now seemed like noise. He found himself staring out of windows, his thoughts drifting northward to the quiet, gray stone house where his wife was living without him. He had received no letters from her. At first he told himself he was relieved. He had never wanted a clinging, demanding wife. But as the weeks passed, the silence began to gnaw at him. He realized with a jolt of something close to panic that he could not picture her face clearly. He could remember the silver gown, the way she had stood so still at the edge of the ballroom, but her expression, the color of her eyes when she looked at him, had faded. He had never truly looked. He returned to Meridian Hall on a gray October day, unannounced, driven by an impulse he refused to name. The great house echoed with emptiness. The staff informed him that Her Grace was at the Dower House, that she spent most of her time there, and that she was currently in the village at the Lace Cooperative. He mounted his horse and rode through the park, past the formal gardens, until he saw the Dower House. It was transformed. Flowers bloomed along the path. The windows gleamed. Smoke curled cheerfully from the chimney. It looked like a home. It looked like a place where someone was happy. He did not go inside. He rode on to the village, and as he approached the small stone building where the women gathered to work, he heard laughter. He reined in his horse and saw through the window a scene that made his chest tighten. Isidora sat at a long table, surrounded by village women, her head bent over a piece of lace. She was laughing at something one of them had said, her face open and warm in a way he had never seen. Beside her stood a tall, fair-haired man, Lord Ashford, he realized with a start, holding a bolt of cloth and smiling down at her with unmistakable tenderness. Isidora looked up at him and said something that made him laugh in return. They looked like a pair. They looked like a family in the making. Alaric's hands tightened on the reins. A cold, unfamiliar sensation slithered through his veins. It was possessive, sharp, and entirely unreasonable. He had no right to feel it. He had given her nothing but distance. Yet watching her smile at another man, watching her build a life that had no place for him, he felt something inside him crack open. He turned his horse and rode back to the hall without a word. That evening, Isidora received a curt note from the Duke requesting her presence at dinner in the main house. Surprised, she had not known he was at Meridian. She dressed carefully in a simple gown of dove gray and walked through the cool evening air to the hall. He was waiting in the dining room, standing by the fireplace. And when she entered, he turned and looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. The silence stretched. "You have been busy," he said finally. "Yes," she replied, taking her seat. "The estate has needed attention. And Lord Ashford has been assisting you." It was not a question. Isidora met his gaze steadily. He has been a good friend to the village and to me." The word friend hung between them, and Alaric's jaw tightened. He had no claim to jealousy, he knew it, but the image of that sunlit room, her laughter, the other man's smile, replayed behind his eyes. He said nothing more. The meal was eaten in near silence, and afterward Isidora returned to the dower house with a strange, hollow ache. She had seen something flicker in his eyes, something that might have been pain. But she had stopped trying to read him, and she told herself it did not matter. The next day, Lady Marguerite Devereux arrived. She came in a flurry of silk and perfume, descending upon Meridian Hall as if she already owned it. She greeted Alaric with familiar warmth, kissing his cheek, and cast a brilliant, dismissive smile at Isidora. "How quaint this little village is," she said, "but so terribly quiet. You must be starved for company, your grace." She meant Isidora, but she spoke as if Isidora were a piece of furniture. Then she turned her back and began planning a dinner party, a shooting weekend, a series of entertainments that would fill the hall with noise and laughter. Alaric, bound by the obligations of a host and the old ties of family friendship, allowed it. He did not see the calculation in Marguerite's eyes. He did not see the way she watched Isidora, measuring her like an opponent. The house party gathered within a week. Marguerite had invited a select group of fashionable London acquaintances, including several sharp-eyed matrons who loved nothing more than a scandal. She made certain that Lord Ashford was included, seating him beside Isidora at every meal, encouraging their conversation, then turning to her companions with a knowing lift of her eyebrow. She dropped careful words about the Duchess's independent life and frequent visitors, until the air grew thick with insinuation. Isidora felt it like a cold wind. She tried to ignore it, clinging to her dignity, but the whispers followed her through the corridors of her own home. One evening, Marguerite staged her triumph. She arranged a musicale in the drawing room and insisted that Isidora perform. Isidora, who had a quiet talent for the pianoforte, agreed reluctantly. She played a gentle, melancholic piece, and when she finished she looked up to find every eye on her, except her husband's. Alaric was standing in the far corner, deep in conversation with Marguerite, their heads bent together. Marguerite's hand rested on his arm. As Isidora watched, Marguerite leaned even closer and whispered something that made Alaric frown, then nod. The room hummed with unspoken judgment. Isidora rose from the piano bench, her heart pounding, and walked out onto the terrace. She stood there, trembling, as the truth settled over her like a shroud. She had thought she was beyond being hurt by him. She was wrong. She did not hear him approach until he spoke her name. She turned and saw Alaric standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You played beautifully," he said. "Did you even listen?" she asked, and her voice was quieter than she intended. He hesitated. Marguerite needed my counsel, a matter of her late husband's debts. Isidora looked at him, and all the years of silence, all the cold mornings and empty evenings rose up in her throat. "She always needs you," she said, "and you always go. I have stopped wondering where." Alaric's face tightened. "Isidora." "I am leaving," she said. "Not just the dower house. I am asking for a separation, a legal one. I will go to the north to my mother's family. I will not be a burden to you any longer." The words fell like stones into still water. He stared at her, and for the first time she saw something raw and frightened in his dark eyes. "No," he said, "I will not allow it." "You cannot stop me," she replied, and her voice was steady now. "You have never wanted me, Alaric. You married me out of duty. You have treated me with polite indifference for 2 years. I have finally accepted it. Let me go." He took a step toward her, and his voice dropped. "You do not understand." "Then explain it to me," she said. "But I will not wait forever for words you cannot say." He did not answer. He stood there, the most powerful man she had ever known, and he looked utterly lost. Then he turned and walked back into the light and noise of the drawing room, leaving her alone in the dark. The next morning Isidora began to pack her belongings in earnest. The dower house, which had been her sanctuary, now felt like a gilded cage. She wrote a letter to her solicitor, another to her mother's sister in Cumberland, and she did not cry. She was past tears. She moved through the rooms with quiet purpose, touching the books she would leave behind, the lace she had made with the village women. She had loved this place. She had loved him. But loving a man who could not love her back was like pouring water into sand. It vanished and left nothing but thirst. Lord Ashford called that afternoon. He had heard the rumors, seen the strain in her face, and he came not with demands but with quiet, steady friendship. They walked in the garden and he said, "If you need a friend to help you leave, I will provide an escort. No questions, no expectations, only safety." Isadora looked at his kind, honest face and felt a rush of gratitude so sharp it nearly broke her. She thanked him but declined. This was a path she had to walk alone. As they stood by the garden gate, Alaric rode into the courtyard. He saw them together, Ashford's hand briefly touching Isadora's sleeve, her sad smile, the autumn light catching the gold in her hair, and something inside him snapped. He dismounted with a violence that made his horse shy and strode toward them. "Ashford," he said, his voice ice, "you are no longer welcome at Meridian." Isadora stepped forward. "He is my guest." "And you are my wife," Alaric bit out, the words raw and possessive. "I will not have him here." Lord Ashford looked between them, his face calm but his eyes wary. "Your Grace, I meant no disrespect. I came only to offer friendship to a lady who has been left very much alone." The word struck Alaric like a blow. He stood motionless as Ashford bowed to Isadora and walked away. The garden gate clicked shut. They were alone. Isadora turned to him and her voice was low and fierce. "You have no right. You have given me nothing but coldness for 2 years, and now you act as if I am your possession. I am not. I never was." "You are my wife," he repeated, but his voice broke on the last word. "A wife you never wanted," she said. "A duty you were forced to bear. I heard you, Alaric, at the Lambert ball last spring. You told Lord Trowbridge that I was a promise you were forced to keep. I heard every syllable." The color drained from his face. He remembered that night. He remembered the champagne, the bitterness, the careless words thrown out to silence a gossiping acquaintance. He had not meant them. He had never meant them. But he had said them and she had heard, and she had carried that wound for months without showing it. He wanted to speak, to explain, but the guilt was a stone in his throat. Isadora watched the struggle on his face and felt a strange, detached pity. "It does not matter any more," she said. "I have stopped needing your love. I have found my own purpose. I only want my freedom." She walked past him toward the dower house, and he did not follow. He stood in the dying light, the garden around him stripped of its summer glory, and he understood at last what he had done. He had been given a woman of grace and strength and quiet fire, and he had let her slip away because he was too afraid to feel. Afraid of the guilt that bound him to her father, afraid of the love that might grow if he let himself truly see her. He had buried himself in duty and distance, and now he was standing in the wreckage of his own making. That night Isadora sat by the window of the dower house, a single candle burning, and wrote the final letter she would ever write to her husband. It was not angry. It was not pleading. It was simply a farewell. She thanked him for the protection of his name, for the home she had been allowed to build, and she asked him to remember her without bitterness. She sealed it with plain wax and left it on the small writing desk. Then she lay down on the narrow bed and closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt the stirring of something that might have been peace. She did not hear the door open hours later, in the deep quiet before dawn. She did not hear the footsteps on the stairs. She only woke to the feeling of a hand brushing her hair, a touch so gentle it might have been a dream. She opened her eyes and saw Alaric kneeling beside her bed, his face ravaged by sleeplessness, his eyes wet with tears she had never seen him shed. "I lied," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. "That night at the ball, I lied to Trowbridge. I lied to myself. You were never a burden. You were the only good thing left in my life, and I was too much of a coward to admit it." Isadora stared at him, her heart pounding. "Alaric." "Let me speak," he said. "Please, I owe you the truth." He took a shuddering breath. Your father saved my life in Spain. He threw himself in front of a blade meant for me. As he lay dying, he made me promise to protect you, to give you a home, a name. I vowed it, but I never told you the whole of it. I was the reason he died. He died for me, and I have carried that guilt every single day. I thought that if I let myself love you, I would be profiting from his sacrifice, that I did not deserve any happiness that came from his death. So I kept you at a distance. I buried myself in duty and coldness because I was terrified. Terrified of loving you, of losing you, of being happy. And I nearly destroyed us both. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper, worn and creased. He placed it in her hands. This was found among your father's things. I should have given it to you long ago. Isadora unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a letter written in her father's familiar hand, addressed to the Duke of Meridian. Her eyes blurred as she read. Take care of my Isadora, but more than care, let her in. She is like her mother. She will love you fiercely if you let her. Do not make my mistake. Do not lock your heart away. The greatest gift I can give you is not my life, but her. She looked up, tears streaming, and saw Alaric watching her with an expression of desperate hope. I have been a fool, he said. I have loved you since the day you walked down the aisle, pale and brave, and I have spent 2 years punishing us both for a guilt that was never yours to carry. If you leave, I will not stop you, but I will follow. I will spend the rest of my life trying to become a man worthy of you. The candle flickered, the silence stretched. Isadora looked at the man kneeling before her, the man who had been a stranger in her own house, and she saw the broken pieces of him, the guilt, the fear, the love he had been too afraid to name. She thought of the long, empty years. She thought of the lace cooperative, the gardens, the slow building of a life without him. And she realized that she did not want that life anymore. She had stopped waiting, yes, but that did not mean she had stopped loving. I found the bank drafts, she said quietly. In Henshaw's office, the money for the lace cooperative, the funds for the new roof on the widower's barn. It was you. You were the anonymous patron all along. He looked down, his jaw working. I wanted to help. I wanted to be part of your world, even if you never knew. I bought every piece of lace you ever made. I have a drawer full of it in London. I used to take it out and just hold it, because it was something your hands had touched. Isadora let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She reached out and cupped his face, the stubble rough under her palm. You ridiculous man, she whispered. You magnificent, ridiculous man. He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch like a starving man offered bread. Tell me it is not too late, he said. Tell me I have not lost you. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. I stopped waiting, she said, but I never stopped loving you. That is the tragedy and the miracle of it. He kissed her then, not with passion but with reverence, as if she were something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. And when they drew apart, the first pale light of dawn was breaking over the garden, painting the world in shades of rose and gold. They did not leave Meridian. They did not separate. Instead, they began again, slowly, tenderly, learning each other in 100 small ways. Alaric moved into the dower house with her because the great hall held too many cold memories. They planted a new garden together. He learned the names of every tenant she had befriended. He sat beside her at the lace cooperative and listened to the women laugh, and he discovered that he could laugh too. Lord Ashford, with the grace of a true friend, stepped back and wished them well. Lady Marguerite, finding no foothold, departed for the continent in a cloud of silk and spite, and was soon forgotten. In the spring, on the anniversary of their first disastrous London ball, Alaric took Isadora back to the ballroom where it had all begun. It was empty now, lit only by a few candles, and he led her to the center of the floor. You should wear silver, he said. And she realized he had remembered. It draws too much notice, he added softly, but tonight I want every eye to see you. I want them to see the woman who saved me. And there, in the quiet of the empty ballroom, he danced with his wife for the first time. No whispers, no cold shoulders. Only his arms around her, solid and real, and the steady rhythm of two hearts that had finally, after everything, found their way home. She smiled up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I loved you in silence for so long," she said. He pulled her closer, his lips brushing her temple. "Then let me love you aloud for the rest of our days." The music played on,